Welcome to episode 58 of Flag for Discussion. I'm your only host today, Jace Hatfield. Farbode is not with us today. He's moving with his fiance. However, that means he might have a new backdrop in the coming shows, so be on the lookout for that. We're going to cover the quarterfinals recap for Monday, January 5th. And we're also going to do a little bit of talking about the transfer portal and what that looks like currently and what that might mean moving forward in the rest of this singular portal window. And if we have a little bit of time to, at the end, talk about not a bye week curse, but maybe the conference championship curse that is appearing in the college football playoff. To start us off, let's just talk about the first playoff game we had on New Year's Eve, Miami versus Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. Miami wins this game 24-14. Ohio State 0-3 on New Year's Eve, so unfortunate for them there. This was Mario Cristobal's dream game. This was the game where if you could drop a recipe to win, it's a low-scoring slugfest, one in the trenches. You have an elite defensive line versus elite offensive line. It's a game where the quarterback doesn't need to do much. It's a game where the opposing team falls into your trap of throw every play, and that's kind of exactly how this game went down. I thought Miami did a really good job of consistently sticking with the run. It wasn't working very well early in the game. It was probably going for what felt like 3 to 4 yards a carry, but they stuck with it. Their elite O-line wore down the Ohio State defense, and at the end of the game, when they needed that run game to fall back on, they were able to. They were running for what felt like 6 to plus yards at the end of that game, and they were able to kind of run down that clock and take away that win from Ohio State. But more importantly, it was the Miami defense, right? We know how good the defensive line has been this season. They sacked Julian Saint another 5 times, following a 7-sack performance against Texas A&M. We knew that was their recipe. We knew that they wanted to create havoc, and I thought Ohio State played right into that. Early in the game, Ohio State had some success on the ground. Bo Jackson was averaging 5 yards a carry. Donaldson was at 4.5 yards a carry. And as what happened was, as Ohio State start to feel a little bit of pressure, especially from the D-line, they defaulted into not only just dropping back every play, but also starting to try to throw those wide receiver bubble screens. That obviously resulted in a great film watch and a pick 6 for Miami. Right? They kind of fell into that trap. Julian Saint ended up dropping back 40 times. He was sacked for 5, threw 2 picks on those, and also only completed 22 passes. He had a 63% completion percentage, which doesn't sound bad, but when you think about where his average has been, which has been hovering around 80% all season, that's a significant beat for an offense that's used to completing passes at a much higher percentage. Like I said, this felt like the kind of game where Ohio State fell perfectly into what Miami wanted. They got away from the run game in the second half, which forced your young quarterback to, try and make reads really quickly. Once that internal clock gets sped up from the defensive line, you start to ask a lot out of yes, Julian Saint's elite, but that's a lot to ask out of a young quarterback, especially, Jeremiah Smith is going to get his, but outside of that, they struggle to find any sort of consistent play from a wide receiver other than Jeremiah Smith in this game. This is the game that I think Miami, this is the win, maybe a better way to say is this is the statement win that Mario and Miami needed. This felt like that Miami is back win to me. I feel like over the last handful of years, we've seen Miami get to big games and win some of these big games, but I'm talking big games as in they're 9-3 in a bowl game, not in a playoff game, right? They've produced some high-end NFL draft picks. They've done a really good job at high school recruiting. They've started to do a really good job in the transfer portal. But the one thing we haven't really seen out of them was winning big games on the biggest stages against the top-tier programs. And they just won a quarterfinal playoff game against Ohio State, the defending national champions, and easily one of the 2 or 3 best brands and best football teams of the last decade, even more so. So the fact that Miami was doing all of those things and now they get that big statement win, I really feel like this was that next piece for Miami. This was that next stepping stone. And it also felt like it was a big win for the ACC. When Virginia was playing Duke in the ACC championship game, a lot of people, including myself to a degree, kind of laughed at the ACC, scoffed at them a little bit. It was easy to look at the ACC and think, this conference is just a tier below everybody else. It's a laughing stock. It's goofy. They have a 7-5 team playing in it. Miami didn't even make it. And now you have Miami. They beat Texas A&M at Texas A&M in the first round of the playoffs. And then they come in here and they beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. They're making all the right moves in the right places for Miami. And that's really helping the ACC's case because we've also seen Wake Forest beat Mississippi State. Right, we've seen Virginia beat Mizzou. Like these other ACC schools have beaten some SEC schools. Now they beat a Big Ten school. This was big for the ACC as a whole moving forward about the argument of does the ACC and the Big 12 deserve less spots than the Big Ten and the SEC in that whole discussion. which we'll hash out a lot in this offseason. But I wanted to highlight that. And the last note on this game I'll make is Ohio State's going to be just fine. They're going to return their young core of Julian Sand, Jeremiah Smith, and Bo Jackson next year. They'll lose a lot of players to the NFL, undoubtedly, but they have a plethora of 4- and 5-star talents that have been within this program waiting their turn that are going to get chances next year. We're going to get a lot of stars out of that group of guys. And this has always been a strong portal team. It's always been a team that does a good job evaluating the talent they have in-house, figuring out where the gaps might be, and then going into the portal and getting not only just guys that can fill those gaps, but the highest level top-end guys that they feel elevate the program. They've been really good at that whole evaluation and recruiting process too. So I don't think there's anything to be fearful of if you're an Ohio State fan. I don't think this is an over-revealing game. It was just a game in which Miami dominant in the trenches. I think it was, unfortunately for Ohio State, the first time they had really played a team this dominant in the trenches. Maybe Indiana was the other one. Just a team that matched up really well against them, played a really good game, and then just having a young core, like I said, Julian Sand, Jeremiah Smith, Bo Jackson, tough game for Ohio State, but they'll certainly be back. This isn't some sort of dynasty-ending loss or any loss to be concerned about. They'll be just fine. All right, let's move on to the Orange Bowl here, as Dante Moore is calling it, the Vitamin C Bowl. Oregon with a big shutout against Texas Tech. 23-0. Despite the lopsided score, I still think it was very much a defensive battle between these two teams. Neither offense gave you much hope or looked great. I'll start with the Texas Tech front seven. I think that was the best front seven in the country this year, and we saw it on full display. A lot of those guys are going to be playing in the NFL pretty dang soon here. A lot of high draft picks on that. It's going to be tough to rebuild, but with how many players are in the portal and the caliber of a lot of these players, I certainly think it's going to be doable for Texas Tech. It was very clear that the issue here for Texas Tech, though, was everything outside of that front seven. They had done a really good job of building that front seven in the portal, but they just didn't have the juice on offense. They didn't have the offensive line. They didn't have the playmakers, even the back end secondary. They just didn't quite have the pieces outside of that front seven to compete against the elite teams, right? In college football, it's common to have really good teams where maybe you do one or two things exceptionally well, and that's able to mask the other things going on within your team. And I think Texas Tech was a good case of that. I think all season their front seven was able to produce so many negative plays and force so many turnovers that it allowed their offense, playing in a Big 12 where the defense tends to be a little bit weaker on average. It allowed that offense to score a lot of points. They just had a lot of possessions on short fields. They were able to score a lot of points, and it looks good numbers-wise. But you put them in front of an Oregon defense that played their best game all season. But you put them in front of an Oregon defense that was forcing, that forced Texas Tech to make plays. They weren't giving up big plays. And also the Oregon offense wasn't particularly turning it over left and right and allowing Texas Tech to have short field positions. Texas Tech wasn't able to sustain a drive. They just didn't have the O-line to compete in that game. Their wide receivers were completely shut down one-on-one by all of Oregon's corners. And the Texas Tech running backs just didn't have the speed, the agility, the elusiveness to get by and around the Oregon defensive line and linebackers. And it was just kind of an overall, the Texas Tech offense, there was nothing that they could do in that game. Now, I think this is a good representation of where Texas Tech wants to be. I think, like I said, the flaws of building a team strictly through the portal is you can only bring in so many impactful portal players with NIL and how much players cost and getting them brought into your program. There's only so much you can do through the portal. And you look at what Texas Tech had done. And I thought it was very similar to year one under Dan Lanning, Oregon, where when Mario left Oregon, I think there was 8. He only had 8 kids in that class. So Dan took over a team where there was 8 incoming freshmen, and then a mass exodus of kids that had left to follow Mario to Miami, and then also just to go elsewhere in the portal once Mario had left. Dan had to go and make a team out of the portal, and just similar to Texas Tech, he made a damn good football team. It was just a football team that you could tell it had gaps that were a little bit too massive to overcome on big stages. And then Oregon's used high school recruiting and development over the years, or even transfer portal players in, but guys who maybe transferred after 1 year somewhere. But they've used that to now have a roster where they do have their strengths, just like Texas Tech's front seven. But then those positions that you might not look at as a strength, they're still incredibly talented and they play at a very high level. That's what we see out of Ohio State year in, year out. When you look at the dynasties of Alabama and Georgia not too long ago, that's how they played. And you look, that's kind of where these elite teams operate at. And I feel like this was a game where Oregon finally kind of felt like that elite team, where their offense wasn't clicking the way they might want it to, but they were just they're so well-rounded at every position that they were able to still come out with a 23-0 win in a game where it felt like half of their team didn't show up. I think that's where Texas Tech wants to be. Texas Tech is recruiting at a high level finally moving forward. I really like Joey McGuire. This felt like a game where Texas Tech's going to say in 4 years from now, when Texas Tech's winning these kind of games, they're going to say, yeah, that was the turning point for us where we realized the difference between a team that's fresh and new to the scene and a team that's a little bit more established. That's where we're trying to be. That's kind of what this game felt like to me. Talk a little bit about Oregon moving forward. Something they've struggled to do all season is it's like my golf game. This thing and this thing can never be good at the same time, right? It's like this is good, this isn't. And it just never seems to have all the switches on. In this game, the offense was off, a lot of self-inflicted wounds, plus the elite front seven. The defense was incredible. Special teams was really good in this game. There was one missed field goal, but outside of that, Sappington was good. They had a great trick play for a punt for a first down. They did a lot right in this game, but the offense wasn't there. And you look at the JMU game, special teams was on in that game. The offense was on in that game. The defense wasn't. That's been the story of this Ducks team, and that's kind of what comes with the territory when you have an incredibly young team, when you have single-digit seniors on the starting, when you combine both offense and defense, and it's a team that's been banged up. Indiana, I don't want to preview these next games. We'll save that for when we get Farbode back, because that's going to be, these games are a lot of fun to preview. But when you look at Indiana, that's a team that plays at their A game. They play their ceiling, they play A game. They're so disciplined, so consistent every snap. All phases of Indiana football is going to be playing at their A game. And this is an Oregon team that hasn't put that together much this season. It's happened a few times where all three phases were playing at their A game. I believe that Oregon's a good enough team that if all three phases are playing their A game, they can beat Indiana. But that's a big if. That it hasn't happened much this year. Like I said, it's a very young team that's been pretty banged up. They're getting healthier, but that's a big if. So we'll see. That's going to be, I think, what you're looking at, and you got to ask yourself as you head into the Indiana game. Are we going to be able to get an A-plus game out of Oregon in all three phases? If so, I like their chances. If not, Indiana is probably going to come out with a win again in the rematch. All right. Let's jump into the third game. Speaking of Indiana, this one was just an absolute blowout, right? Indiana obliterates Alabama. It was 38-3 in the Rose Bowl. Like I said, Indiana, this is the most disciplined, well-coached team I feel like I've seen since the prime Nick Saban days. They just never seem to make mistakes. And this comes from a lot of different things, right? Like I said, this is a team that plays at their ceiling. Part of that is coaching. I think this is a team, every single game they go into, the coaching staff has an effective game plan. It's well thought out. It's thorough. It's hard to read. It's hard to guess. It's tricky. It's smart. And it plays into the strengths of this team. And it shows because every single week they come out, they do everything well. They pass block well. They run block well. They run the ball well. They throw underneath well. They throw downfield well. And they execute at such a high level. Every single time, too, their shot plays are so well thought out. On defense, their disguised blitzes are so well thought out. They have very specific scenarios. You can tell that they know when they want to use them. They know what they're looking for in order to use them. When they get it, they call it, and the players execute it. It's just a team that is firing on all cylinders. They look unbelievable. Obviously, we saw that in the Rose Bowl. And it wasn't like that was just some random, oh, wow, Indiana looked amazing all of a sudden. No, this is how they've been all season. And like I said, that's why with Oregon, they need to play A game on all phases because this is an Indiana team you can guarantee is going to play an A game in all phases. So you're going to have to somehow outlast them. You're not necessarily going to beat them. You're not necessarily going to get lucky by them making mistakes and shooting themselves in the foot. That's not what this Indiana team does, which is why they're as good as they are, why they won the Big Ten, why they're 14-0, looking to go potentially win a national championship at 16-0. So they're just unbelievable to watch. And I think moving forward, with the way that they coach, as long as they can retain these coordinators and position coaches, and as long as they have Curt Cignetti, honestly, they're going to be just fine year in, year out. So I'm excited to see how their season ends here. And then also moving forward, I don't think this is a fluke. I think this is a true culture. This is true culture at Indiana. I think it's playing flawless football. It's mistake-free football. And we even heard it with Curt Cignetti this week had mentioned how he doesn't like to waste time, right? And he doesn't even ask his coaches stay late. He's very intentional with everything he does, and he wants everyone in that building to be. And that's the kind of focus that produces, the discipline and the execution that we see out of Indiana. Now, on the flip side of that, the entire opposite side, you have Alabama, a team who seems to consistently play incredibly sloppy. Players don't seem to be on the same pages. There's a lot of shooting themselves in the foot, a lot of backwards plays, a lot of lapses and mishaps. The game plans don't seem to be well thought out or put together strongly. They also don't seem to complement team strengths. They also don't seem to be in a way that exploits what the other team's going to do. Very confusing game out of Alabama, and maybe something I'll talk about a little bit later in the show, but I'll bring it up now. This is something that this game really makes you rethink the logic about selecting playoff teams. About, hey, I know they didn't want to punish Alabama for losing the conference championship because you want to maintain the sanctity of what is a conference championship, and I respect that. I really do. But it makes you think, yes, that might be the right move, but is it the right move, right? Is it the move that actually produces the best teams in the playoff? Because I think anyone with eyes can agree that over the last 4 or 5 weeks of the year, Alabama in no way, shape, or form looked like a playoff team. Even Oklahoma, for that matter, was a team I thought was on the same page. A lot of their good wins were propped up by ranked teams that I think we've really seen, like Vanderbilt just got manhandled by Iowa. Tennessee loses to Illinois. Missouri loses to Virginia. Nobody considered beating Illinois or beating Iowa quality wins. People were making fun of Big Ten teams for those being quality wins. Meanwhile, people were acting like beating Missouri and beating Tennessee were world-beating wins and wins that were impossible. Turns out they were actually pretty simple wins. And this was a game where you really saw an Alabama team who played in the SEC championship game, 3 losses, played a real team in Indiana, and they got smoked. They didn't look like they deserved to be on the same field. They didn't look like they were playing the same sport. They looked completely lost out there. So I think there's a whole discussion that Farbeau and I will hash out this offseason, but a whole discussion about the structure of the playoff and how we choose teams, auto bids. Is our conference is really better than others because of how much parity we see, or the SEC's been historically awful in these bowl games and Big Ten's been great. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation all offseason. I think a lot of it's going to start with Alabama. It's going to say this was a 3-loss team, a team who just played in a conference championship game against another playoff caliber team, and they looked like they were 5 steps below that playoff caliber team. So are we sure they're a playoff caliber team? To the luck of Alabama, they get to play Oklahoma, who's a same conference opponent who also is on the same page where I don't think they're a playoff caliber team. They win what was a pretty ugly game there. They get their first shot against what felt like a true playoff team, second shot because they got blown out by Georgia, and they get blown out again in even worse fashion this time by Indiana. So it does make you kind of question the setup, the process, the importance of conference championships. Do they really reveal much? Are we putting too much emphasis on them? Not enough. That's a whole fun conversation that we'll have. But to kind of close on this game, job well done by Indiana. This is the same dominant Indiana team we've seen all year. They're dominant in every single phase of football. They just execute at such a high level. They continue to do so here, and I have no reason to believe that they won't do that moving forward. And I'll admit, hand up, I was a guy that kind of was waiting for Indiana to finally have the game where they made a mistake or two. Finally have the game where the shot plays don't work. Finally see a game out of them where the big plays just aren't there for them. After this game, I'm just convinced that it's culture. The execution that they operate with is culture. The coaching staff is just so thorough and intentional in every game plan and every play call. They just always have a plan. The players are on the same page as the coaches, and that's just the way that they play football. They're going to be a very tough out, and we saw that here. And the first and only team in the college football playoff that got a bye to actually win their game in the last 2 years. So 1-7 in their bye games, and they're the first ones to do it. So props to them for that. And they did it in convincing fashion too. All right, moving on to our last game here. Definitely the most thrilling of all 4 of the quarterfinal games. Ole Miss stuns Georgia 39-34 in the Sugar Bowl. This was a phenomenal game, so I'm kind of glad it was the night game, something to just chill on the couch and relax New Year's night and watch this one unfold. This felt like a QB playmaking battle to me. We hit a point in that third, fourth quarter, kind of the turn there where it felt like, yeah, this is just going to be quarterback who can make plays. The defenses didn't seem to have any answers, so it was going to be which quarterbacks can make plays versus the other one. The answer was overwhelmingly Trinidad, right, over Gunnar Stockton in terms of that. I thought Trinidad, every single time they needed a play, that kid was phenomenal, making big plays. I think he definitely made a name for himself in the NFL drafts world. I know he's working on maybe getting another year of eligibility. We'll see what goes down there. Either way, I think he set himself up beautifully if that doesn't work out with the NFL. This felt like two very opposite teams here. I feel like Ole Miss is a good football team that's being elevated by really good, even elite quarterback play. I think it's a team that really thrives on Trinidad making big plays, that they really seem to, momentum-wise, both offense and defense, really like rise with the tides of Trinidad. When he makes big plays and he's playing well, it seems like it elevates that whole team. And it hasn't happened much this year, but when he's struggled, that team seems to really, run by him. So they kind of take a dip. Again, that hasn't happened much this year, and it didn't happen in this game. And on the flip side, I feel like Georgia is a really, really good football team that, dare I say, might be held back a little bit by Gunnar Stockton. And subsequently, what that would mean is play calling, right? And Mike Bobo. We've heard Farbode come on the show a few times and say, come on the show like it's like he's barely on here. Comment on the show, as he's obviously the host. Comment on the show that Mike Bobo isn't his favorite play caller. And I agree with him. I think something you saw here, Mike Bobo, the play action and the dink and dunk, it only works so much. And it also works especially when you're able to sustain long drives and then get the ball back quickly, because it's this play style that's meant to drain out the opposing team defense, suffocate them. Think Alabama, Georgia, SEC conference championship game. That is like the world where Mike Bobo's offense of dink and dunk, bootlegs, play actions, that's where it lives. That's where it thrives. Well, in this Ole Miss game, the opposite was happening, right? The Ole Miss offense was able to drive down the field on Georgia and make big plays, get momentum. The Ole Miss defense struggled in this game. It struggled all year, but they had enough firepower and juice to make stops late in the game when they needed it because they were able to be rested on the sideline. And like I said, after a while, having Gunnar Stockton roll out to his left and take a big hit to just throw it 5 yards downfield, you can only do that so much before he starts to get, worn out, before the team as a whole starts to get a little worn out. These plays, they take a long time to develop. They require a lot of deception. And at some point, the defense catches on. At some point, you don't have all that time. At some point, your quarterback's taking so many hits, he's banged up. And it just kind of felt like as the game went on, Gunnar Stockton and the Georgia offense they couldn't keep up with Trinidad and the Ole Miss offense and fell right into the hands of Ole Miss. Ole Miss, Miami, two very different built teams. I'm very excited for that game. Again, don't want to preview it too much, but moving forward, I think protecting Trinidad and not having him play hero ball every single game is going to be the key. Miami's a really good defense. And then if you get Indiana, or if you win that game, you get Indiana or Oregon, two very good defenses as well. I don't think any of those three teams that you can play hero ball and for more than a quarter, right? And expects to win those games. Those crazy scramble plays that he made were awesome. They were phenomenal. They barely made it through with Georgia. I don't think that's going to work with Miami, Indiana, or Oregon. So finding out how to win with a little bit more structure is going to be huge for Ole Miss moving forward. And then for Georgia, this is an interesting outlook I have for Georgia here. So coming into the playoff, they were overwhelmingly the team with the highest percentage of roster players that were recruited, not brought in through the portal. I thought that I really respect that. And first of all, Georgia recruits at an insanely high level. They always have one of, if not the highest blue chip ratio, which means 4 and 5 stars on the roster. They're always way up there. They recruit at a high level. They develop at a high level. The one flaw with staying in-house so much and not moving around and going into the portal is there can be gaps that occur in your team. Guys don't quite develop. Maybe you have a recruiting cycle or two back to back where one position group you just don't get a stud out of it. And you're not able to develop those guys and they don't develop with you. And now you have a little bit of lapses at these various position groups. Well, if you don't go in the portal to fill them, you're really banking on some of those guys stepping up at some point in the season and figuring it out. And I feel like that's kind of been the story of Georgia's season this far. For the most part, they haven't needed to rely on all position groups. But in this game, Georgia, you could tell they really needed a quarterback who could stand in the pocket, stay in the pocket, and deliver strikes downfield. You could tell they needed a quarterback who could throw 20 yards over the middle confidently. You could tell that they needed a quarterback who could sit in the pocket and deliver a deep ball and a big throw, and they needed it. It felt like Gunnar Stockton just didn't quite have that in him. It felt like everything was a bootleg. Everything was short and underneath. And if it wasn't short and underneath, it was just like a 50 yards, chuck it downfield, pray somebody catches it. That felt like a gap that Georgia had where had they gone to the portal and gotten a high-end quarterback, maybe things could have been differently. Similarly, I think wide receiver was a position group that they got Zachariah Branch out of the portal and he was great. But outside of him, they had nobody. Right? I don't think Gunnar Stockton really had any wide receiver help outside of him. they could have used another high-end wide receiver out of the portal. And then defensive backs. I thought that they're a young defensive back team. They're really relying on some young guys they've recruited in the last 2 years to step up and play DB. And they've had moments where they're great this year, but in a game like this where you're playing an elite quarterback against really good wide receivers, you could just tell the defensive backs they were a step below, and they just couldn't quite keep up with some of the big plays, especially as the game got kind of crazy there at the end with just the atmosphere and the energy and the big plays. Georgia looked like they could have used, if they just went into the portal for maybe a better QB or maybe one more elite receiver, maybe 1 to 3 veteran DBs. Didn't have to be elite, but just veteran. That could have been the difference between winning and losing this game. I respect the crap out of Kirby Smart and Georgia for really honing in on recruiting and development. So I'm not trying to rag on them for that at all. That's amazing, and I would love to see more teams go that route. But I do think in today's era of college football, it's okay to go into the portal a little bit when you need it. I think there's a few teams like Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame that I think do a really good job of identifying their own weaknesses and saying, all right, time to go spend in the portal. Those are programs you're not going to see go get 30 portal guys or even 20. Those are the teams that usually get like 8 to 12, but it's 8 to 12 guys who end up becoming playmakers and difference makers because they fill that gap. I'm curious to see if Georgia, if this is the loss that kind of flips that for Georgia, and maybe next year they do make a little bit bigger of a splash in the portal. Maybe next year they do decide, hey, I'm willing to go get 5 more portal guys than we got this past year, because it looks like that could have been the difference. That's what it felt like to me. They still have Kirby Smart. They still recruit incredibly well. They still have an insanely talented roster. They're going to be just fine moving forward. I do think if they become a team that's willing to go into the portal, they immediately become that top dog Georgia that we're used to the last 5 years. I think if they stay away from it, you might see a little bit more of what we saw this year out of Georgia, a little more volatile, a little bit more window year-esque, where, like I said, that we saw this year out of Georgia. But we'll see. Speaking of the transfer portal, I wanted to do a little bit of a transfer portal recap. This is being recorded on January 4th, so the portal opened 2 days ago from where I'm talking to here. And as of this morning, there's been a few interesting updates with the transfer portal. First one I'll start with is right before I hit record, Brandon Sorsby got a few crystal ball predictions to LSU. Maybe at the time this is released, he's already committed there. It sounded like before that he was down to LSU and Texas Tech. He's now down to, or the crystal ball is now with LSU. The other quarterback, so Brendan Sorsby's QB1, not necessarily my QB1 in this class, but QB1 in terms of like he'll dictate where the dominoes fall. The other quarterback that's right there with him is Sam Leavitt. Where these two guys go are going to determine where all the other quarterbacks go and what schools are looking to do. Sam Leavitt sounds like he's demanding north of $3 million, which is absurd. Let's see if it's interesting to see if it's like the NFL where, you know, a guy will every couple of years, the QB market gets reset. I'm curious if that's how NIL goes or if this is a one and done thing, if this even works out for him. Sounds like Kentucky is in the mix. I know he's been linked to Oregon a lot, but it sounds like it wasn't so much Oregon as it was their offensive coordinator, Will Stein. So Sam Leavitt, with Will Stein becoming the head coach at Kentucky, that sounds like that's been a destination for Sam Leavitt. Their former quarterback has entered the portal. Sounds like they have been able to get a lot more NIL funding, not just for basketball, but for football now. So Sam Leavitt could be that big slash they get or they make. The other teams I've heard tied with him would be LSU, Miami, and Texas Tech. And I still have heard Oregon's name. Oregon's also an interesting domino in this whole thing. If Dante Moore stays, then obviously Oregon won't be in the portal for a quarterback. If Dante Moore leaves for the draft, which he's a redshirt sophomore, so he's after this year, he'll be 3 years up, meaning he's eligible for the draft. If he leaves, then Oregon immediately becomes most likely looking for a quarterback unless they feel one of their younger guys is ready. And if they do, they probably also become one of the top destinations for a guy, right? So someone like Sam Leavitt, I'm sure Oregon's still in the back of his mind. But where Sorsby and where Leavitt go is probably going to dictate where the rest of all these quarterbacks fall into place. Another two big wide receiver names that have entered the portal, Cam Coleman, first one. Arguably, he's my number one player in the portal in general. Sounds like Texas is going to be the move. It's not a done deal yet. He's going to visit Texas Tech as well. Something interesting about Texas, I believe Parker Livingston is his name, had entered the portal and kind of made a note saying it wasn't his decision and that made a side comment that he was forced to leave. And it sounds like he went to Texas and said, like, here's how much money I want. And they were basically no, and they really lowballed him. And then he kind of was like asking them what's going on. He was their wide receiver 3 this year. He's from Texas. He's a lifelong Texas fan. kind of asking them, hey, what's up? I'm asking for less than people my caliber are being asked that they're asking for. I don't even want that much. Like, why are you not retaining me? Sounds like he didn't really get a straight answer. And from what people have been saying now, it sounds like Texas has been trying to free up some wide receiver NIL money so that they can go after Cam Coleman, really trying to do this do or die with Arch next season. And on a similar note, I know this is not a wide receiver. I'll get back to that room here in a second, but Isaac Brown, the running back out of Louisville, highly productive the last few years. That's also a running back who's entered the portal, and he's been 100% crystal ball to Texas as well. And similarly, Texas has offloaded 2 big running backs already in the transfer portal. Sounds like they've been trying to free up NIL money for Isaac Brown, in which case it feels like Texas is really going do or die in 2026 with Arch Manning. The strategy there is interesting, right? You're forcing guys out who were highly recruited and, from what we know, at least with Livingston, wanted to be there. You're forcing guys like that out to bring in guys, big name portal players that have been highly productive previously, with the hope of winning a national championship, right? Turning things around. They went 9-3 this year, kind of going all in on Arch Manning to give him a couple weapons that might change the narrative next year and might flip things around. If it works out for them, that's going to be great. I think everybody will forget that they pushed these guys out. People will kind of take it as a one-off, and that'll be that. On the flip side, if it doesn't work out, Texas has another down year, don't make the college football playoff. At what point does that impact your recruiting? At what point does that impact the way that people see you and say, hey, you kicked out guys that you recruited that wanted to be here from your state for what you thought were bigger and better players, and it didn't work out for you? So that's going to be a very interesting thing to track the rest of this transfer portal. Do they end up with Cam Coleman and Isaac Brown? Do they keep pushing guys out? Is there animosity among the guys that have been pushed out? And then how does it work for them next year? Does that impact recruiting? We'll have to see. But the other wide receiver I wanted to talk a little bit about was Nick Marsh. Sounds like he's going to be visiting Notre Dame and Indiana first. That would be a massive get for either program. Indiana, we've seen what they do with high-end wide receivers. Omar Cooper, phenomenal. Eli Surratt, phenomenal. That's a program that I think Nick Marsh could flourish in. That's a system that he would do really well in. Can't miss there. And then Notre Dame, I think he would be a great fit with Notre Dame. I really feel like the development of CJ Carr was impressive. He looked really good. I foresee big things from him next year and moving forward. It's a team that I think was a wide receiver one away from maybe beating one of Texas A&M or Miami. I feel like Nick Marsh could easily come in and be that playmaker, that difference maker at wide receiver. That's more than just a good player. That's a true downfield threat, true big play threat. They already run the ball so well, too. If you mix in a guy like Nick Marsh with a team like that, I think they could be in store for big things as well. So that's another big name to be on the lookout for. Some other notes: the North Texas studs, running back Caleb Hawkins, wide receiver or quarterback Drew Mestamaker, and then all the other good starters from North Texas this past year. It seems like they're going to follow their former head coach Eric Morris to Oklahoma State. So it appears a lot of those guys have already committed there. More of them will. So kind of expect those North Texas to Oklahoma State pipeline guys go, which will be fun. It'll be fun to see how that impacts Oklahoma State, a team that was horrid this past year. North Texas, a team that was phenomenal this past year. It'll be cool to see how a very similar North Texas team performs in the Big 12. It kind of be a good litmus test for everyone to see the true difference between a Group of 5 and Power 4 team goes, how those conferences line up. This will be a great test to kind of see the difference in them. A couple other notes: Byron Brown, he's going to follow Alex Golish to Auburn, it seems. And then Rocco Becht, also, it seems he's going to follow his former head coach, Matt Campbell, to Penn State, along with a good amount of other Iowa State football players. Iowa State had one of those years last year where they returned everybody coming into this season, hoping for a big year. Faced a lot of injuries, struggled at the wide receiver position, had a bit of a down year. Looks like and then between players going to the draft and players entering the portal, this is a roster that it feels like single digit players on it. So we'll see how that all turns out for them. But it does look like they've had a few crystal ball predictions for some of the higher name players in the portal. So we'll see how that goes. A lot like the Arkansas State quarterback has been predicted there. So a lot of players, high-level players from Group of 5 looking to move up is what Iowa State looks like they're going to. Now, something that's really interesting to talk about with the transfer portal, there's obviously dozens of other players that are entering at elite level. There just has been little to no information about where they're going to go. So wasn't going to speak on that quite yet. But the other interesting thing to look at about the transfer portal, over the last 5 years, we have seen the transfer portal actually work out really well for a large handful of schools and kids. We've seen schools where Texas Tech, where they are consistently a mid-tier program, and in 1 year with a big transfer portal class, they turn themselves into a college football playoff team. They looked elite. They win the Big 12 for the first time. We've seen that transformation happen overnight, quite literally. That's never happened. And before the transfer portal, that was never really an option to transform that quickly. Similarly, we've seen a lot of kids work wonders for them, where maybe they were high caliber players on smaller brands, smaller teams. They move up and they become elite, and they go from nobody knew their name to they're going to be drafted in the first or second round, and they are in Heisman conversation, right? We've seen guys growth like that. We've seen guys who got lost on depth charts, who maybe they're a junior at LSU and they just couldn't figure out a way onto the field there. They go to Virginia, and then all of a sudden they're world beaters. So we've seen the transfer portal work really well for a handful of kids and a handful of schools. Something interesting, though, is in those 5 years of the transfer portal, we've really only seen anywhere from 1,500 to the most it's been last year was 2,700 kids enter it. Now, it's a lot of kids, but it's a pretty consistent number. And like I said, I think things worked out. The majority of those kids of the 1,500 to 2,700 fit the bill of one of two things. They were either an elite player on a lesser team, lesser brand, lesser program, and they wanted to raise their name for potential draft stock, NIL money, things like that. And they also wanted to compete for more. Rather than going 6-6, maybe they wanted to compete for conference championships, compete for a national championship. Totally valid reason to transfer, 100%. You're bettering your career, you're bettering yourself. Totally get that. The other reason we would see a lot of was, as I mentioned, you have guys who are a little bit older, getting lost on depth charts, realizing that the clock's ticking. Maybe they only have 1 or 2 years left of eligibility. They don't want to spend that on the bench. They want to try and, with the last year or two they have, make a name for themselves, see what they can do. And they've gone out and they've done that. Think Malik Benson. We've seen that work out really well for those 1,500 to 2,700 kids who fit that bill. As of January 4th, today, we are already over 4,500 players in the transfer portal. That is 2,000 more than we had last year today. It's still open for another, I believe, for another 12 days, so we could see more guys enter. My fear is a lot of the guys that have entered the portal fit the bill of 1 and 2 that I just talked about. And I think those guys will end up bettering themselves for the most part. But we're now seeing a lot of guys leave who only were at a program for 1 year. They didn't play right away, and now they just want to leave after 1 year. You're still young, though. That scares me because we have thousands of kids who enter for that reason. And the issue with that is there's not a lot of film on you. There's not a lot of tape on you. The reason you probably didn't play as a true freshman was because the team you were at had bigger, faster, stronger players than you. You probably just need to put on 30 pounds. You probably need to prove yourself a little bit more. And if you shy away from the competition and you're going to leave after 1 year at a program, what are you going to these other programs with and say, hey, yeah, I gave up after year 1 because I didn't think I was going to play. Can I play here? Well, you don't have any credibility. You don't have any film. You didn't build up any respect with your previous coaches and team. You don't really have anyone vouching for you. I could see a world where a lot of these kids, they end up at, if they truly want the playing time, I could see a world where they just take significant decrease in brand and the program, and then they go put up, whether they're good or not, at these smaller programs. Within a year or two, they're either just going to have to look to transfer back up to where they were beforehand and then rebuild their chemistry with their team, rebuild their trust and respect out of coaching staffs, or they're going to get lost in the fold and things don't work out. We have a lot of guys that seem to be entering after 1 year at a big program, where I would be on the side of, hey, maybe stick it out for 2 or 3 years, see if you can get your way onto that roster. And if not, then maybe look to transfer. So those guys, I think, scare me a little bit. And then the second group of people we've seen we're seeing this with quarterbacks, right? We're seeing a lot of guys transfer who are looking to go bigger, looking to get more money, looking to get a bigger program, when I don't think they were quite particularly all that good to really go be looking for big money, to really go be looking for the big program and the big name. I get it for maybe a Sam Levitt, because Sam Levitt is that high level talent. Sam Levitt is a guy that a big name program is going to spend a lot of money on. But what happens once Sam Levitt commits somewhere? What happens when Brendan Sorsby commits somewhere? Eric Morris has gone to Oklahoma State. Only so many schools have quarterback openings. And of these schools that might have a quarterback opening, a lot of these schools, they don't want, they care more about the output of that position group. They're going to bring in guys to compete, right? If you are DJ Lagway, you're leaving Florida. he could go to another SEC school and that's great, but he's going to have to get there and compete anyways with another 4-star kid who's been in that program for 2 years. Well, that kid knows the offense. That kid has chemistry with the wide receivers, and he's got respect from the coaching staff. You're going to have to go in and compete with that. You're not going to just show up and get $2 million and be QB1. And I think there's a lot. DJ Lag was the first name that came to my mind. I'm trying not to single him out there. I feel a little bit bad about that. But that's going to be a big storyline that I think we have to follow. With 4,500 kids, only so many of them are going to find upgrades. There's only so many upgraded spots available. Plus, a lot of these schools, like Georgia that I just mentioned earlier, a lot of these big name programs that kids want to go to, they have 4- and 5-star recruits from high school coming in. They have 4- and 5-star recruits that have been on the bench looking to upgrade. They have other players in the portal that they might like more than you. I think is what I'm getting at is I'm afraid that there's an overflux of kids transferring. They saw how it worked for teams. They saw how it worked for players in these past couple of years. And they think, oh, well, this kid just got more money. Then he got to start on a better team. Let me go do that. Well, those kids got that because they had a reason to transfer. And they got it because the transfer portal was a little bit smaller. It was easier to be more intentional with your scouting, your recruiting, your development, and all of that going in. With 4,500 plus kids, it gets a little bit harder to figure out what fits best. If it comes a little bit more convoluted, I think schools are going to start maybe appreciating recruits a little bit more, appreciating high school kids a little bit more, which I think could bode well for high school recruiting. I don't hope that this transfer portal cycle goes poorly. I want these kids to be better off because they transfer and all that. If I'm being realistic, I think it might go poorly for a lot of people. And a lot of people we're going to see guys that transfer this year, do nothing next year, and transfer very next thing next year. I think we're going to see a lot of that. And it'll be interesting to see how that changes the dynamic. I could see a world where, like I said, coaches start to say, you know what, it's way easier to know what I have in these kids who stick around that I've recruited out of high school because I knew I liked them. I'm going to trust these kids. I'm going to stick it out with these kids, see what they can do for me. The portal, if you are clearly obviously an upgrade, I'll go after you. But if you're not, I'm not going to waste my time in 1 million NIL in a kid that might never play for me. That this year with 4,500 entrants, and like I said, it seems like we opened 2 more buckets of why people are entering the portal, and I don't think those buckets have a lot of logic or reasoning behind it. I unfortunately think we're going to get a scenario where a lot of kids get left in the dust. And on the flip side, I think we're going to see a lot of schools who saw Texas Tech upgrade this year and think, oh, we can build a 1-year winner in the portal. I could see a world where then they go out in the portal and they get 30, 40 guys and it doesn't work out for them. And then now you have little to no high school kids and a bunch of graduating portal kids that didn't work out and really leave your program in a complete mess. It'll be interesting to see. This is a new year of the portal. Like I said, the last couple of years, it had been in that 1,500 to 2,700 realm, kind of fluctuating between that. It's a lot of kids, but it's within about 1,000 kids each year. We just upgraded that by 2,000 this season. We're at 4,500. It's unprecedented, by far the most it's ever been in the portal. And we still have 4 teams fighting for a national championship, meanwhile, while we're doing all of this too. Very interesting times. There's a lot of conversation to be had around the schedule of the season and how all of this should play out. So this is something too that we'll be tracking throughout the coming weeks. And I'm very excited to have Farbode on to kind of get his input on all of this. It's interesting. It's the transfer portal will be a tough thing to follow with 4,500. I believe I read somewhere, take this with a grain of salt because I believe it was on Twitter that I read this, but that's a third of active college football players, which is pretty crazy to think about. I think it does bode well for kids who stay loyal to their programs. I think coaches are going to be much more willing to give NIL and playing time to kids who stay within versus kids who want to transfer after 1 year, or maybe kids who truly weren't that much better than their program but think they can do more. I think those kids are going to get found and they're not going to do a whole. All right. We'll conclude the show with one last segment here. I want to talk about maybe what could be a conference championship epidemic. Say that questioningly, because look at these stats here. They're kind of interesting. In 2024, the 5 conference championships went 0-5 in the college football playoff. In 2025, the 5 conference champions went 1-4 in the college football playoff. Indiana over Alabama being that one win. And then participants of conference championship games are 5-14 overall. Now, I'll point out a few flaws to this conversation here. Flaw number 1, small sample size. It's been 2 years of the 12-team playoff. So small sample size, right? We haven't even hit 22 opportunities for this to hit. So small sample size is one. And the other one is we are counting as conference champions the group of 5 teams who very good teams, but they do usually get mashed up against what is elite Power 4 teams. So that's added to it a little bit as well. Still, 1-9 overall is pretty alarming. 5-14 for teams who played in that game is pretty alarming. I feel strongly that there is an issue with the conference championships in the sense that, is it a schedule issue? Is it a playoff bracket issue? The conference championships really mean much in today's world of realignment? I think all of those have some truth to it. We've heard multiple coaches, and I'll cite Dan Lanning because he was the most recent one, as he said this leading up to the Texas Tech game, and even said it again with Curt Cignetti recently here yesterday on Saturday. Coaches are agreeing that the month-long bye, the 28 days off, is truly disastrous and truly negatively impactful to their teams. Now, coaches like Dan Lanning did the thing where he was like, when they asked directly, like, do you think the bye week hurts? And he was like, let's just say I'm not mad that we didn't have to do that this year. Like, it's very clear that these coaches do not particularly enjoy 28 days off of football. And I think we can all agree that 28 days without playing is quite ridiculous. These conference championship games happen 1 week after the regular season. So, but then the bye week is like 13 days extra. So yes, you play 6 days after everyone else, but then you play 13 days later. So you're really getting an extra 7 days off that nobody else has to get. Plus, when you go jump and you play in most of these, let me tie things together. Playoff bracket. The way it's set up the first year was the conference champions get the bye weeks, the 4 bye weeks, and then the last one is the 12 seed, the group of 5. The way it lined up this year was not necessarily. It was we're just going to put the 4 best teams 1 through 4. It's not necessarily the conference champions that they are, but it still kind of works out that way naturally, right? It just kind of works out because of how much we value conference championships. Teams that won it, we gave the buys for the most part, right? For 3 of the 5. And then even for like a team that competed in it and lost, they still got that buy. So that adds to the 5-14 of participants of conference championship games overall. This stat correlates a lot with the bye week stat, and there's a lot of overlap of teams that compete in conference championships and teams that get the bye week. It just feels like the bye week is detrimental, and it does feel like the teams that win conference championships or even compete in it have to then go play. They play in what has become a meaningless game where if you win, you're really going to get a bye, and I don't know if I want that. But if you lose, like, can it impact you? It hasn't yet. So losing, guess, means nothing in Alabama's case, right? SMU last year. It's kind of a mess. And I get to the playoff bracket issue because I think we need to talk about the obvious killer of the bye, as I mentioned. But the other one, we need to talk about how late this season goes on for, right? The fact that we're still playing college football and we still have 3 games to go. We're not going to finish this thing until January 19th. That's way too long between games. You're really ruining the mojo of these teams coming out of the regular season. And I think that conference, because of how far away the conference championship game is from the playoff and how there doesn't really seem to be much of a reward for winning the conference championship other than bragging rights, it's created an interesting scenario with conference championships where I don't think teams see it to the degree that they might have used to, especially in today's world where conferences are so large that you can skate by, like look at Texas A&M, you can skate by a conference schedule that's incredibly easy without playing any of your top teams and potentially compete in the conference championship. Now, the tiebreakers worked out in a way where that didn't happen for Texas A&M, but they were right there. They just had to beat Texas, and they would have competed in their conference championship by playing one team over 500 in their conference. It's also interesting because of how many teams we have now and how few of them play each other. You get ridiculous, crazy tiebreaker scenarios. Look at the ACC. Miami, Final Four team in the College Football Playoff. They just beat Ohio State, the defending national champions. They didn't even compete in their conference championship game. It was 7-5 Duke versus, I think, what ended up being 9-3 Virginia. I don't think it's a good indication of which teams are best in their conference. Look at Alabama competed in the SEC championship. For no point in the last 7 weeks of the football season did I think Alabama was one of the 2 best teams in the SEC. Ole Miss is the only one still kicking. They didn't play in the conference championship game. So I don't think conference championship games are even a good indicator of who the best teams are in their respective conferences. And it also, because we overvalue, oh, well, Alabama lost their conference championship and they looked like they got completely outmatched. They got dog walked by what was a playoff caliber team. We let them skate free because of that, because it was a conference championship. Like, I think conference championships were negative in that. And then on the flip side, like I said, like Virginia Duke playing in it kind of threw a wrench in the whole thing, because neither of them felt like they were playoff teams, but one of them was maybe going to get guaranteed a spot, even though the best team in the conference, Miami, didn't even play in it. I'm not saying get rid of conference championships. That is not my solution. I love the idea of them, and I do not want a world where they don't exist. But I think we need to rethink the structure of the playoff, rethink the idea of auto bids, and maybe the size of playoffs, or how we view, or how we even set up conference championships, before we continue forward with having weird conference championship games that don't seem to provide much benefit. They also don't really seem to hurt teams. They kind of just seem like this extra game you play, an extra game where you risk getting injuries, not really for any positive reward. I want conference championships to mean something, like I think most college football fans do. What if we lived in a world? I think first things first is getting a playoff structure with no bye weeks. I don't really think anybody should get a big benefit or not have a benefit from bye weeks. 2 weeks is enough. If you're not going to be healthy after 25, 21 days, heck, even 14 days, you're not going to be healthy after 28, right? Start the games way sooner. And if you're thinking, oh, you don't know football, you didn't play college football, you're just a guy talking about it, go listen to Dan Lanning. I think he knows football pretty well. And and then listen to Joey McGuire, agree with him, and give his reaction to it, because I think he knows football pretty well too. A lot of talking heads will say, hey, pull up the season. We don't need 4 weeks after the season. We just need like 2. Give us one bye and then start. Or maybe do conference championship week and then start right after. And then go from there. Let them play out the rest of the season, end the game, and national championship Jan 1, end it there. That's the obvious playoff bracket fix. Go to either 8 teams would be my ideal scenario. The unfortunate reality is, because of money, that'll never happen. So they're obviously going to go to 16, but I would rather 16 than 12. Go to a 16-team format then. Get rid of that first round bye, and then maybe change up your conference championship structure. Maybe we do, for auto bids, we do 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3. And the 2 winners of that get to move on to the playoff. Or maybe figure out a way to do 1 versus 2 if you want like a tried and true conference championship, and both teams are auto spots in the playoff, but maybe the team that wins gets to pick a seed. There's got to be some solution. And this is also something we'll hash out this offseason. There's got to be a solution that helps us recreate the value and the honor of winning a conference championship, but also making them have meaning and have them be useful to you as a team going into the college football playoff, not being a detriment. And I think that's something important too. Or maybe you make it even. No bye week. If you play in the conference championship, you get 2 weeks off. If you don't, you have 3 weeks off. So almost make it like that third week for the other team is, yeah, you have 1 more week to get healthy. That might not be super helpful, but it's there. But more importantly, you have that. If you're the bye week team, you have 2 weeks off to get healthy, but you also don't have that extra week where you're just getting rusty. There's something there. But basically the point of this was kind of call out that interesting stat, throw some hypotheticals in the world that I'll answer with Farbode this offseason about how we could go about fixing this thing. But it is sad. It is sad that it feels like conference championships, fans don't quite care about them as much anymore. Coaches and players, I don't think, quite care about them as much anymore. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, these teams don't seem to perform all that well, push comes to shove, in the playoff. So I think it's time to maybe rethink how we structure this, how we set these things up. Part of it too is as fans, maybe something we could do, right, is speak more highly on intermediate accomplishments. It feels like in today's college football world, it's all about natty or bust. If you didn't win the natty, you stink, and if you fall short of it, you're bad. If your team doesn't win it, they disappointed you. I think we need to find that happy balance where we find excitement, in winning a conference championship or even competing in it. I remember back in the day growing up around Michigan State fans, even when Michigan State might not win a national championship, but the fact that they made it to the conference championship game and the fact that they won the Outback Bowl against Georgia, that meant a lot to people, and that people used to really value that. It doesn't quite happen anymore. And I think part of this whole thing I'm talking about could be a fan solution of maybe we need to bring back some respect for the intermediate seasons, the the 8-5 years where it was a growing 8-5 and being more proud of it. But that's my final spiel. I think once I get into that spiel, it's probably time to hang up the cleats for today, not for all time. For those of you still with me, you stuck an hour of a solo show. That's quite impressive. Thank you very much for listening to me. As always, remember to hit us up on our socials, follow, like, subscribe, comment, interact with us. It's something that's very fun to Farbo and I. It also helps us grow, so we appreciate it greatly. We're on TikTok at flagged4discussion. We're on Twitter or X at F4discussion. And we're on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast at flagged4discussion. Once again, thank you for listening to me for this quarterfinals recap. Get ready for Farbo and I's preview of the semifinals. This has been Flagged for Discussion.